Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, a 12-year marriage unraveled when OP's wife, fascinated by his prepper brother's lifestyle, cheated with him during a temporary stay at his farm. Discovered by him, a confrontation ensued, leading to the end of both relationships. He found solace in sharing the betrayal with family and, despite the pain, rebuilt his life, repainting and remodeling his house. The brother and ex-wife expressed remorse, but forgiveness remains a process for him. Now let's get into the story. My wife, 40, and I, 43, were married for 12 years. We never felt ready for children, and I guess that's a good thing because of the story I'm about to tell you. Our house unexpectedly flooded, so during the repairs, my older brother, 48, was kind enough to let us stay at his house with him and his dogs. He was kind of like a doomsday prepper and didn't believe in marriage or commitment. My wife was fascinated by his lifestyle and admired all the hard work he put into maintaining his self-sufficient farm. I think she was tired of living the usual life and just needed some change. Well, instead of talking to me about it and making a good change, she made a change without asking me. A change that would ruin our marriage. I was sleeping in the guest room when I woke up in the early morning hours to find my wife gone. The night before, we all drank and sat talking by a fire. We'd been staying here for 5 days at this point, and we didn't know how long our stay was going to be. I started tiptoeing through the house, trying not to wake up my brother, who was a light sleeper in the event of an intruder or emergency. My brother was already awake. His dogs were lined up at the crack of his door, smelling intent to deduce what was going on inside. I heard a quiet movement, but before I knocked, I thought it would be smart to see if I could see under his door because I heard some noises. I could see his bare feet and legs up against the side of the bed, shifting his weight in a way that meant intimate. I felt myself knock on the door as I watched underneath. I saw my wife's feet drop down in a hurry and step into the nightgown that lay on the floor. I could hear her whispering, "Oh my God," because she probably didn't know how they were going to explain themselves. I heard my brother opening the many door locks and he greeted me. I was standing now, and he was sweating. He looked really nervous. I think it was much harder for him to face me after having intimate with my wife than he thought. He couldn't look me in the eye, and all he said was he was showing my wife the closets full of guns and non-perishable food. I punched him pretty hard. He fell back and grabbed his face. I told him he wasn't my brother anymore. Then I looked at my wife and told her she wasn't my wife anymore. I said I saw them under the door and they each had complete disregard for me. I left to return home and inform both families of this betrayal. It was extremely difficult, but after I told my mom, things instantly became easier. She cried with me and understood how upset I was. She said she was going to sound my brother, which gave me the idea to call my M.I.L. She didn't want to believe it, but she did offer my apologies and gave me some advice. Moments later, my wife called me. She said her mother was disowning her because I told her what happened. I asked her if she thought she deserved this, and she was quiet. She got bitter and said since I turned her mother against her, she'll just keep my brother instead of me. I laughed and said my brother wouldn't keep her for more than a month. Turns out my brother kicked her out 17 days later. He said he felt horrible for what he'd done to me, and it took him all this time to realize he would only ever see her as my wife. He said he hated himself for doing this and never wanted to commit to a woman in the first place. He left a voicemail with his whole account of the breakup because he wanted me to forgive him. My wife also continued to beg and plead for forgiveness. I might forgive my brother, but it will take me a while. I'm happily divorced and living in the house that I've repainted and remodeled. It looks completely different, and I know the woman I used to know would have enjoyed this very much, but it's not hers to enjoy anymore. I've had lots of company over and even hosted parties, which is something I never used to do. It's still very painful to know what my wife did to me by doing my best to take it day by day and focus on other things in life. Today's second story. In this story, a couple in their 30s faced relationship issues after having their first child. Opie focused on a demanding job and struggled to meet his wife's emotional needs. They stopped talking for 3 weeks, and tensions rose when the wife started staying out late. Suspecting infidelity, the husband tracked her and discovered an affair with her boss. In a bold move, he exposed the affair on social media, leading to their firings. The divorce left the wife struggling, eventually finding a job and moving into a trailer. She now regrets her past expectations and acknowledges life's challenges. Now let's get into the story. My wife, 35, and I, 37, had our first baby together. Things started to go downhill. I worked full-time and occasionally worked late or had to bring work home with me. I'd still help with the baby as much as possible. My wife worked full-time too, but her job was way more laid back and had different hours. Her boss even let her bring the baby to work. Now that's a nice job. She told me I lost all the passion in our relationship and that I didn't give her the attention or love that she required. I tried explaining that my job required a lot of brain power, and I felt like any attention I'd offer her wouldn't be good enough anyway. Like her bar was set too high, and by trying, I would prove I was a failure to her. This went on for some time, and we eventually stopped talking for 3 weeks in a row. During that time, she went away to visit her older daughter from another marriage. While she was there, she tried telling me, "We need to talk," and I said, "No, thank you," because I was so tired of always being in trouble with her and never being what she expected me to be. So our awkward silence continued even after I picked her up from the airport. We had an argument about it at home and sort of made it up, but even though we were talking again, it wasn't the same. She started getting really dressed up in some sexy outfits and just told me she was going out with friends/family. On the first time she went out, she didn't return until 6 o'clock a.m. I yelled and cussed at her for being so selfish and staying out that late when we had a baby to care for. I don't remember what her excuses were at that time, only that I was becoming increasingly suspicious of her behavior. Another time, I decided to surprise her and meet them at the restaurant when I was off work. When I got to the restaurant, no one I knew was there, and when I called her, she said they decided to go somewhere else but wouldn't tell me where. How odd. She went out a few more times before I put a tracker on her car. The next time she told me she was going to work. It didn't feel right to me, like she was too happy. Something told me to discreetly take her house key back before she left, so I did. After a few hours, I tried calling her several times with no response. She finally returned my call, but it sounded like she was in the bathroom. I asked her where she was and she said she was at work. I checked the GPS and it said she was in hotel. I was seeing red as I drove to the hotel and found her car parked in front. I waited about 15 minutes until she came out with some guy. I got close and snapped some really good pictures on my phone. Then I got up in their faces and screamed at them, calling her several names. You don't sleep with someone until divorce papers are presented, and we never discussed that. She said she had been telling me for over a year and a half at that point that I needed to be more attentive and invested in her since I hadn't been. She considered herself single. I told her the world doesn't revolve around her every need and desire for attention. It would have been easier for me to show her love if I didn't feel like I was going to fail her unrealistic expectations. Then I looked at her lover. He was standing there sheepishly, probably praying. I didn't recognize him, but I did. I spat at him and screamed, asking how long he thought it would take for him to find a new job. He was my wife's boss. As he stood there dumbfounded, I snapped one more picture of him and my wife. I asked them what they thought the company's course of action would be upon being informed about their affair. They shook their heads and looked down, visibly ashamed. I know this was an involuntary response as I walked back to my car. They both tried telling me to stop and think things through. That was a laugh. I drove to their office, and it didn't take long for me to have a special meeting with her boss's boss. He didn't find it so amusing that they'd both called off that day claiming to be sick. He decided to fire both of them first. He called my wife, and as I sat there, I really enjoyed hearing her squeal and freak out on the other line. On the way to file for divorce, my wife called me in a screaming panic, saying needed to stop acting so rashly and think before sabotaging her reputation. I asked her if she ever stopped for 1 second and thought about what I needed or how I felt. She was quiet. I hung up and used my phone to post pictures of her and her boss on Facebook. My phone started blowing up with questions from her friends, family, and colleagues. She tried calling me again several times. After I got the divorce papers, I returned home to find her looking for her house key. She immediately started crying to me, saying she had nowhere to stay. She thought she'd be able to stay with someone, friend, family, or colleague, but all of them were so disappointed by her actions that she was cut off only because I wasn't purely evil. I arranged for her to sleep in our garage while I slept inside the house with our baby. In exchange for this, she had to find a job and start paying me rent. So just like that, she went from living in a payment-free house, having a job, supportive family, friends, and husband to nothing. At first, she struggled to find a job and was forced to sell some of her expensive treasures, most of them gifts for me to afford the rent. She eventually found a job that she hated but kept going because she had no other options. When the divorce was finalized, she was told she had 30 days to find her own place. She moved into a trailer and continued working her sucky job while she got visitation with our daughter. She actually seems remorseful now for demanding and expecting so much from me. She understands how hard life is when you have a job that doesn't cater to your needs and an unappreciative, or in her case, non-existent spouse. Today's third story. In this story, Obi discovered his girlfriend's affair a month into leasing their first apartment together. Despite addressing exclusivity early in the relationship, he found evidence of her cheating. When confronted, she callously suggested a threesome and insisted he accepted. Now let's get into the story. I, 23 male, just leased my first apartment with my girlfriend, 22 female, of 2 years. We were only living there for a month before I found evidence of her affair. She let me know while we were dating that she was pretty sure she was bi. I shrugged it off. That was fine, right? As long as she knew what it meant to be in a committed and loyal one-on-one relationship. I asked to make sure she was only exclusively seeing me after 4 months into our relationship, and she said yes. She would message her friends all the time, but promised me she took our relationship seriously. Fast forward 1.5 years, and we're very much in love and getting our first apartment together, a signed lease with each other. I was a little nervous, but I thought that was normal. We were together so often, and we'd be living together. There's no way she could have something going on behind my back. I was kind of wrong because she got away with something for a month. One morning as I got ready for work, I found long blonde hair in our bed. Since I had short black hair and she had curly brown hair, I was pretty certain qualified as evidence of an affair. I showed it to her and asked if she had someone else in our bed. She shrugged and asked what I'd do about it if she did. I was speechless, and she added that if I was cool about it, maybe I could join them. I said I would end the relationship immediately because I wouldn't stand for being cheated on. She said we just signed the lease together, so I have to suck it up and appreciate what I had. I told her she was a psycho for thinking I was okay with this, and I paid a visit to the leasing office. The landlord was very empathetic and outraged at my story. She wrote me a letter that rescinded the lease. My ex was furious and started screaming and throwing stuff around. She wouldn't be able to lease the apartment without me because she still didn't have a job. I asked her why she couldn't just move in with AP, and she said it was none of my business. I didn't care. At least I knew she couldn't have a place to bring her back to. The landlord had another rental available, and she let me rent for cheap to help me cope with an unexpected life change. So my ex tried reaching me for a month until she finally gave up. I know she hates me, even though she's a heartless cheater. She didn't have the maturity to rent a home with someone. And I wish I would have been able to tell her that living with someone requires selflessness, understanding, and responsibility. She acted like living with someone only meant they had to help her pay the bills no matter how badly she treated them. That's selfish and controlling behavior if I ever saw it. I became a house party host, which is something I never would thought to do before in fear of my fiancée going out of her way to flirt with other people. I'm enjoying my freedom and certainly hope others don't fall for someone as disrespectful as this girl.